"You should have packed your things before dinner," Chloe said without even looking at me, her voice calm, almost bored, like she was reminding someone to take out the trash instead of telling her husband's mother she no longer belonged in her own home. I remember the way the overhead light reflected off the polished oak table, the same table I had spent 20 years setting for birthdays, holidays, quiet Sunday dinners, back when this house still felt like it had a place for me. No one raised their voice. That was the strangest part. There was no argument, no explosion, no moment I could point to and say, "That's when everything broke." It was quiet, controlled, decided long before I ever sat down in that chair. Michael didn't look at me either. My son kept his eyes fixed on his plate, pushing food around like a child who didn't want to be there, but also didn't have the courage to leave. I waited, not for an apology, not even for an explanation. Just something, a glance, a flicker of hesitation. Anything that would tell me this wasn't as final as it sounded. But nothing came. The room felt staged, like a scene rehearsed without me. I noticed details I normally wouldn't. The way Chloe's glass was already empty, the way my place setting didn't match the others, the way my coat was no longer hanging by the door when I had walked in. Small things, quiet things, the kind of things that don't mean anything until suddenly they mean everything. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I simply nodded, as if she had made a reasonable suggestion, and reached for my purse. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought they would shake. I thought I might feel something loud. Anger, heartbreak, humiliation. But what I felt instead was something colder. Something quieter. Like a realization that had been forming long before this moment finally decided to show itself. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked to the door. No one stopped me. Not even a drive safe. Not even a call us when you get there. Just silence behind me as I stepped out onto the front porch. The same porch where I had once sat holding Michael as a baby, rocking him through long nights when he couldn't sleep. The air outside was cooler than I expected. I remember thinking that I should have brought a heavier coat, even though it wasn't that cold. Maybe it was just the way the house felt now, like it had already erased me before I even left. I walked to my car, opened the trunk, and realized my suitcase was already there. Packed, neatly, efficiently, as if someone had taken their time making sure I wouldn't forget anything important. That's when something shifted. Not a feeling, not yet, just a thought. A quiet, precise thought that didn't belong to confusion or sadness. If they had planned this, then what else had they planned? I closed the trunk slowly, got into the driver's seat, and sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I replayed the last few weeks in my mind. The conversations that ended too quickly, the documents Chloe had asked me to sign just for convenience, the way Michael had started avoiding certain topics altogether. At the time, it had all felt off, but I had ignored it. Because that's what you do when you trust your family. You explain things away. You tell yourself you're overthinking. But sitting there in the driveway, with a suitcase I hadn't packed and a home that no longer felt like mine, I realized something simple and undeniable. This wasn't sudden. This was deliberate. And whatever they thought they had taken from me, they had made one mistake. They assumed I wouldn't notice. They assumed I wouldn't look closer. They assumed I would just leave and stay gone. I drove for nearly 20 minutes before I realized I had no idea where I was going, which was strange because I had lived in this town for over 30 years and could navigate it without thinking. But that night, every street felt unfamiliar, like I had already been removed from the life I thought I knew. So I pulled into the first place that had a vacancy sign glowing in the window, a small roadside motel just off the highway that I had passed 100 times and never once considered stepping into, the kind of place people ended up in when they were in between things, and I suppose that was exactly what I was now, in between a past that had just been taken from me and a future I had not yet decided on. The man at the front desk did not ask questions, which I appreciated. He simply handed me a key attached to a faded plastic tag and pointed toward the second floor, and I carried my suitcase up the narrow stairs, each step echoing louder than it should have, as if the silence from earlier had followed me here and settled into the walls. The room was clean but impersonal, a standard bed, a small table, a lamp that hummed faintly when I turned it on, and I set my purse down carefully, taking in the space as if I needed to confirm that this was real, that I had actually been removed from my own home and placed here instead, in a room that smelled faintly of detergent and something older underneath it. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to pause, not to break down, not to panic, but to think, because the more I replayed the evening in my mind, the less it felt like an emotional decision, and the more it felt like a completed plan, something that had been discussed, arranged, and executed with precision. Chloe had been too calm, too prepared, and Michael had been too quiet in a way that was not confusion but compliance, and that difference mattered more than anything else. I took out my phone and stared at it for a moment, half expecting a message, some attempt to soften what had happened, but the screen remained empty, no missed calls, no texts, nothing to suggest that either of them felt the absence I had just created by leaving. That silence was not accidental, it was intentional, and the longer it stretched, the clearer it became that they were not waiting for me to come back. They were expecting me to stay away. I leaned back against the headboard and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, but to organize the fragments of the past few weeks that had not made sense at the time. The way Chloe had insisted on handling certain bills, the documents she had placed in front of me with a smile that now felt rehearsed, the casual way she had said it would just make things easier. If everything was streamlined, and I had agreed because it seemed harmless, because I trusted her, because she was family. But now, sitting in a room I had never planned to be in, I understood that convenience had never been the goal, control had been. I opened my eyes and looked at my suitcase, still neatly packed, still too prepared for something that was supposed to be spontaneous, and I realized that this was not the end of something. It was the beginning of understanding it, because if they had gone through the effort to remove me this cleanly, then there had to be more beneath the surface, something worth the planning, something worth the risk of assuming I would never question it. And that assumption, more than anything else, was where they had miscalculated. I did not expect the call to come the next morning, but it did, right as I was pouring a cup of weak motel coffee that tasted more like warm water than anything else. And for a moment, I just stared at the phone as it buzzed against the table, Michael's name lighting up the screen in a way that felt both familiar and strangely distant, as if it belonged to a different version of my life. And I let it ring one more time before answering, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to hear how this would begin. His voice was careful, almost rehearsed, asking if we could meet for lunch, somewhere neutral, just to talk. And that word talk carried a weight it had not carried before, because now I understood that every conversation with them had layers I had not been allowed to see. I agreed without hesitation, choosing a small restaurant about 10 miles away, a place I knew well enough to feel comfortable, but not so familiar that it would carry memories I could not control. When I arrived, they were already there, seated in a booth by the window, Chloe sitting upright with that same composed expression, Michael beside her, his posture slightly tense, like he had been told to sit still and follow a script. I noticed immediately that they had ordered drinks but not food, as if they did not intend to stay long, as if this meeting had a purpose that did not include sharing a meal. I slid into the seat, across from them, and placed my purse beside me, taking a moment to look at both of them without speaking, because silence had become more revealing than words. Chloe smiled first, a polite, controlled smile that did not reach her eyes, and said she was glad I agreed to come, that things had gotten a little out of hand the night before, and that they just wanted to clear the air, but there was no apology in her tone, only management, as if she was adjusting a situation rather than repairing it. Michael nodded along, adding that they had been under a lot of stress and that maybe everything had come out the wrong way, and I listened carefully, not to what they were saying, but to what they were avoiding. No one mentioned the suitcase. No one mentioned the fact that I had been told to leave. Instead, Chloe leaned forward slightly and said something that shifted everything by just a few degrees. She mentioned that it was important for everyone to be on the same page moving forward, especially now that the house paperwork had already been updated, and she said it casually, like it was a detail I should already understand, like it was something we had all agreed to. I did not react immediately. I simply tilted my head slightly, letting the silence stretch just enough to make her continue. And she added that it would make things easier if we all respected the current arrangement, because reversing anything now would be complicated. That word complicated settled into my thoughts in a very precise way, because it confirmed something I had only begun to suspect the night before, that there was a timeline here, a sequence of decisions that had already been completed, and I had been the only one not fully aware of it. I glanced at Michael, watching his expression carefully, and for a brief second he looked at me, really looked at me, and there was something there, not guilt exactly, but awareness, like he knew I had just understood more than they intended me to. I gave a small nod, as if everything made sense, as if I accepted the explanation they had not fully given, and I even allowed a faint smile to form, because the moment I showed resistance, they would adjust, they would close whatever gaps were still open, and I was not ready for that. Instead, I let them believe that I was still trying to catch up, still processing, still exactly where they expected me to be, because the truth was, I had just moved one step ahead, and they did not know it yet. I did not go back to the motel right away after that lunch. Instead, I drove slowly through familiar streets that now felt slightly misaligned, like I was seeing them from a different angle, and I kept replaying Chloe's words in my mind. Not the full sentences, but the specific choices she made, the confidence in her tone when she mentioned that the house paperwork had already been updated, as if it was a completed task, something irreversible, something I had been part of without fully realizing it. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that whatever had been done was not recent. It had been in motion long before that dinner, long before the suitcase appeared in my trunk. I pulled into a small parking lot near a branch of my bank, the same one I had used for years, and sat there for a moment with the engine still running, watching people walk in and out like nothing in the world had shifted, like documents were just documents and signatures were just routine. And for most people that was true, but not for me anymore. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and walked inside, the air conditioning hitting me with a quiet hum that felt almost too calm compared to the thoughts forming in my head. The teller recognized me and smiled politely, asking how I had been, and I returned the smile just enough to keep things normal, because normal was still my best advantage. I asked to review some recent documents, specifically anything related to property or account changes over the past few months, and while she processed the request, I stood there with my hands lightly resting on the counter, appearing patient, even casual, but inside I was aligning timelines, matching conversations to dates, remembering when Chloe had first started insisting on helping with paperwork, when she had brought forms to the kitchen table with a reassuring tone, explaining that it was just to simplify things, just to make sure everything was organized for the future. When the documents were finally placed in front of me, I did not rush. I flipped through them slowly, page by page, scanning signatures, dates, and notations, and then I saw it, not in a dramatic way, not as a single shocking line, but as a pattern, multiple forms connected by timing, each one building on the last, and my name was there, my signature was there, but the context around it was not what I had believed it to be at the time. Certain authorizations, certain transfers, subtle changes that, on their own, looked harmless, but together formed a structure I had not agreed to consciously. I felt a quiet stillness settle over me, not panic, not anger, just clarity, because this was no longer a suspicion, it was a design, and I had just found the outline of it. I thanked the teller, gathered the copies, and walked back to my car, placing the folder carefully on the passenger seat like it contained something fragile, even though what it really held was something precise. As I sat behind the wheel again, I did not start the car right away. Instead, I looked straight ahead and allowed one final piece to fall into place. Chloe had not simply made a careless comment at lunch. She had revealed confidence, the kind that only comes from believing everything is already secured, that there is nothing left to challenge. And that belief, more than anything else, told me exactly where to look next, because people who think they have finished a plan tend to stop hiding it as carefully. They relax, they speak a little more freely, they assume the outcome is fixed. I reached for my phone, not to call them, not yet, but to make a different kind of appointment, one that would not involve polite smiles or controlled conversations. Because if the paperwork had been updated, then there had to be someone who processed it, someone who could explain exactly how it was done and under what authority. And that was where the next answer would be waiting, not in what they said, but in what they thought I would never question. I did not wait long to make the appointment, because hesitation was the one thing I could not afford anymore. And by the next morning, I was sitting across from a quiet, methodical attorney whose office was just far enough from my neighborhood to avoid any chance of familiarity, a place where conversations stayed contained and details mattered more than impressions. I placed the folder of documents on his desk without rushing, letting him open it at his own pace. and I watched carefully as his expression shifted not in surprise, but in recognition, like he had seen patterns like this before, which told me more than any immediate reaction could have. He asked a few precise questions, not about how I felt, but about when each document had been signed, who had been present, what explanations had been given at the time, and I answered each one as clearly as I could, reconstructing moments that had once seemed routine, but now carried a different weight. The afternoon Chloe had brought in a stack of papers and said it was just a standard update. The time Michael had reassured me it would make things easier down the road, the way I had signed. Without hesitation, because there had never been a reason not to trust them. The attorney nodded slowly as he reviewed the pages, pointing out how each document connected to the next, how authority could be transferred in stages, how ownership could shift without a single obvious moment of change. And as he spoke, the structure I had sensed became fully visible, not as a suspicion anymore, but as a deliberate sequence of actions that had been carefully arranged over time. He explained that everything depended on intent and understanding, that signatures alone did not always mean consent if they were obtained under misleading circumstances. And that was the first time I allowed myself to consider something beyond observation, something closer to response. I asked him one simple question, not about what had already happened, but about what could still be done, and he did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed the folder, folded his hands, and looked at me in a way that measured not just the situation, but my willingness to follow it through. When he finally spoke, his words were steady and exact. He said that there were options, but they required patience, precision, and above all, silence, because once the other side realized they were being questioned, they would adjust, they would protect themselves, and any advantage would disappear. I understood that immediately, because it aligned perfectly with what I had already begun to see. That Chloe the next morning felt quieter than any morning I could remember, not because the world had changed, but because something inside me finally had. I woke up before the sun, the same way I used to when I still lived in that house, when every day felt like something I had to survive instead of something I was allowed to live. But this time, there was no tension in my chest, no hesitation in my breathing, no voice in the back of my mind telling me to be smaller, quieter, less of a burden. I sat by the small kitchen window in my apartment, holding a warm mug of coffee, watching the early lights stretch across the empty street. And for the first time in years, I did not feel like I was waiting for something bad to happen. My phone buzzed again on the table, and I already knew who it was before I even looked. My son had called 3 times since last night, and there were 2 messages from my sister, both asking the same question in different ways, telling me I should reconsider, that family is everything, that people make mistakes. I let the phone sit there for a long moment before I finally picked it up, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the difference between who I used to be and who I was becoming. I used to rush to respond, to fix things, to make everyone else comfortable, even if it meant abandoning myself. But now, I simply unlocked the screen, read the messages without reacting, and placed the phone back down. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on my door, soft at first, then a little more urgent. I already knew who it was. When I opened it, my son stood there, looking older than I remembered, like the weight of the past few days had finally settled on his shoulders. He tried to smile, but it did not reach his eyes. He said my name the way he used to when he was a child, like it still meant safety, like it still meant I would fix everything for him. He told me they were sorry, that things got out of hand, that no one really meant what they said, that the house did not feel the same without me there. I listened quietly, not interrupting, not correcting him, not filling in the spaces the way I always used to. When he finished, there was a long silence between us, one that felt heavier than anything he had said. I stepped outside, closing the door gently behind me, and looked at him clearly, not as the little boy I raised, but as the grown man who made his own choices. I told him I was not angry anymore, and that seemed to confuse him more than anything else. I explained that anger had kept me tied to them for years, hoping things would change, hoping I could earn a place that should have already been mine. But I was done hoping for something that only existed in my imagination. He asked me if I would come back, and for a moment, I could see how much he wanted the answer to be yes, not because he understood, but because it would make everything easier again. I shook my head gently and told him that I was already where I belonged, not in a house where I had to earn my worth, but in a life where I finally understood it. He stood there for a long time, like he was waiting for me to change my mind, like I always had before. But I did not. And eventually, he nodded slowly, turned around, and walked away without another word. I watched him until he disappeared at the end of the street, and when I went back inside, the silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt like peace. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first, almost like I was stepping into someone else's life, someone who did not carry the constant weight of proving their worth. I began to notice small things I had ignored for years, like how sunlight moved slowly across my living room floor in the afternoon, or how quiet evenings could feel comforting instead of lonely. I started walking every morning, just a little over a mile around the neighborhood, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel present in my own life again. The first few times, I caught myself thinking about them, replaying old conversations, wondering if I had been too harsh, if I should have said something different. But each time that thought appeared, I reminded myself of the truth I had finally accepted, that respect is not something you beg for, and love is not something that should make you feel small. About a week later, I received a letter in the mail, not a text, not a rushed voicemail, but a handwritten letter from my daughter-in-law. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening it, tracing my fingers along the edge of the envelope like it carried more than just words. When I finally unfolded the paper, her handwriting looked careful, almost hesitant, like every sentence had been rewritten more than once. She apologized, not in the way people do when they're trying to fix things quickly, but in a slower, more deliberate way, acknowledging specific moments, specific words, things I had not even realized had stayed with me for so long. She wrote about how she had misunderstood my presence in the house, how she had seen me as someone in the way instead of someone who had built the very foundation they were standing on. She admitted that asking me to leave had felt justified at the time, but only because she had never taken the time to understand what I had given up to make that home possible for all of them. I read the letter twice, then a third time, not searching for flaws, but trying to understand the sincerity behind it. It did not erase what had happened, and it did not magically rebuild what was broken, but it felt different from everything that had come before. That evening, I placed the letter in a drawer instead of throwing it away, not as a sign of forgiveness, but as a sign that I was no longer reacting from pain. A few days later, my phone rang again, and this time, I answered. My son's voice was quieter, less certain, and for the first time, he did not start by asking me to come back. Instead, he asked if we could meet somewhere neutral, maybe a small diner halfway between my place and theirs. I agreed not, because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to see if something honest could exist between us without the pressure of the past controlling every word. When I walked into the diner that afternoon, he was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, looking up the moment I stepped inside. There was no tension in his expression this time, just a kind of nervous honesty I had not seen in years. We talked for over an hour, not about returning, not about fixing everything overnight, but about what had gone wrong, about the boundaries that had never been spoken, and the assumptions that had slowly turned into distance. I told him clearly that I would not go back to the way things were, and he nodded, not arguing, not trying to convince me otherwise. It was a quiet understanding, not a resolution, but a beginning of something different. When we stood up to leave, he hesitated for a second, then gave me a gentle hug, not out of obligation, but out of something that felt real. And as I walked back to my car, I realized that for the first time, I was not walking away from something. I was walking forward into a life that finally belonged to me. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that meeting, and I did not expect it to, but something had shifted in a way that felt steady instead of fragile. The following weeks moved forward with a quiet kind of consistency, the kind that does not demand attention, but slowly rebuilds something from the inside out. I kept my routines simple, my mornings with coffee by the window, my walks through the neighborhood where the same houses and familiar faces started to feel like a new kind of belonging. I began to talk more with the woman who lived across the hall, someone I had barely noticed before, and our short conversations in the hallway gradually turned into shared afternoons, sitting with tea and exchanging stories that did not carry judgment or expectation. It reminded me that connection did not have to come with conditions, that it could exist in small, honest moments without the need to prove anything. My son called occasionally, not every day, not with urgency, but with a kind of respect that had been missing for a long time. Our conversations were different now, slower, more thoughtful, as if we were both learning how to speak to each other without the old patterns getting in the way. He told me about work, about small frustrations and quiet victories, and for the first time in years, I listened without feeling responsible for fixing everything. I simply listened as a mother who cared, not as someone who had to carry the entire weight of his world. One afternoon, he mentioned that they were hosting a small family dinner, nothing elaborate, just a few close relatives, and he asked if I would feel comfortable coming. The question was careful, almost hesitant, and I could hear the effort behind it. I did not answer right away. Instead, I told him I would think about it, not because I was unsure of myself, but because I wanted my decision to come from a place of clarity, not obligation. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the soft hum of the city outside my window, and I asked myself a question I had never truly considered before, not what they wanted, not what would make things easier, but what would feel right for me. I thought about the house, about the memories tied to it, both the good and the painful ones, and I realized that going back there did not mean returning to who I used to be. I had already changed, and that change did not disappear just because I stepped into a familiar space. A few days later, I called him back and said yes, but I was clear about one thing. I would come as a guest, not as someone returning to fill a role that no longer belonged to me. When the day arrived, I drove over in the late afternoon, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind calm in a way that surprised me. The house looked the same from the outside, but as I walked up to the front door, I felt the difference within myself more than anything else. When they opened the door, there was a moment of quiet, not uncomfortable, but aware, as if everyone understood that something had changed even if no one said it out loud. The evening was simple. Conversation flowed carefully at first, then more naturally as time passed. No one tried to pretend the past had not happened, but no one forced it into every moment either. It was not a perfect reunion, and it did not need to be. It was something more honest, more grounded. And as I sat there, surrounded by people who were finally beginning to see me not as an obligation, but as a person with her own life, I realized that I was no longer trying to belong in their world. I had already built my own, and now, I was simply choosing when and how to let them be a part of it. The evening ended without any dramatic moment. No sudden apologies or emotional declarations, just a quiet sense that something had been acknowledged without needing to be fully resolved. When I left the house that night, I did not feel drained the way I used to after every family gathering, and that alone told me how much had truly changed. I drove home slowly, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to sit with the feeling of calm that stayed with me, something that had been missing for so many years that I almost did not recognize it at first. Over the next few days, I noticed that I was no longer replaying every word from that dinner in my mind, no longer analyzing every glance or tone of voice, trying to figure out what it meant. Instead, I returned to my routines with a quiet confidence, knowing that I had shown up as myself, and that was enough. A week later, my daughter-in-law called, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, not out of avoidance, but because I was still learning how to choose when to engage. But I answered, and her voice carried a softness that felt genuine, not forced. She thanked me for coming, and there was a pause before she spoke again, like she was deciding whether to say what was truly on her mind. She admitted that seeing me there, calm and self-assured, had made her realize how much she had misunderstood about me for all those years. She said that she used to think my quietness meant weakness, that my willingness to help meant I did not have boundaries, and that she had taken that for granted in ways she was only now beginning to understand. I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed with everything she said, but because I could hear the effort behind her words. When she finished, I told her something I had only recently learned myself, that kindness without boundaries invites misunderstanding, and that I had played a part in allowing that pattern to continue for as long as it did. There was a silence after that, not uncomfortable, but reflective, like we were both recognizing something that had never been spoken before. She asked if we could start over, not by pretending nothing had happened, but by learning how to treat each other differently moving forward. I told her that starting over did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing to build something new with a clearer understanding, and that would take time. She agreed, and for the first time, it felt like we were not standing on opposite sides of a conflict, but on the same side of something that could grow if we both respected it. In the weeks that followed, small changes began to take shape, not grand gestures, but consistent ones. She would call occasionally, not to ask for help, but simply to talk. When we saw each other again, her tone was different, her words more thoughtful, and there was a noticeable effort to include me in conversations rather than speak around me. My son, too, seemed more aware, more present, like he was finally seeing the space between us not as something to ignore, but as something to bridge carefully. And through all of it, I remained steady in the one thing I had learned to protect, my sense of self. I did not rush to fill every silence. I did not offer more than I was comfortable giving, and I did not shrink myself to make others feel at ease. What surprised me most was not how they were changing, but how natural it felt for me to remain the way I had become. One afternoon, as I sat by my window with the same cup of coffee, watching the same quiet street, I realized that the life I had built for myself was no longer a temporary escape. It was my foundation. Everything else, every visit, every conversation, every attempt to reconnect, existed around that center, not in place of it. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid of losing myself again, because I finally understood that I was the one who decided where I belonged.